So hello, Madeline. I'm really happy to have you for this online talk in the program Dance and Age within the project Tempus Fugit. I would also would like to welcome the philosopher Boyan Manchef, on whose idea actually the whole project was built upon. The main focus of the talk will be the initiative Dance On Ensemble, which was launched in 2015 in Berlin. And maybe please let me play a video that you chose, Madeline, as the beginning of our talk, and then we'll continue.
Great, thank you.
At the end of every show, I used to run to the dressing room, take off all my clothes, squeeze them out, and then collect all the sweat that was coming out of them inside an empty bottle. I did this for more than 20 years, and I had at least 27 liters of my sweat. I kept the bottles in a closet, and from time to time I used to give a quick look at them, and I noticed that the color of the liquid inside of the bottles started changing. At the beginning it was white, transparent, yeah, and then it turned into blue. From blue it went to green, from green to yellow, and then it went into a dirty kind of transparent again. And I also saw that there was a thick layer of white sediment emerging at the bottom of the bottle. And the liquid somehow was diminishing, as if it was evaporating. Indeed, with the years, it completely disappeared, and only this white sediment was left. So what I did is that I collected all the remains of this sediment from all the bottles, and I put it in a little nylon bag. I weighed it, and I had around 11 grams of my sweat powder. So, I don't know how this crazy idea came to my head, but with one of my nostrils, I sniffed a little bit of it. And this strange image appeared in front of my eyes. It came like a flash, but the effects were amazing. It reminded me of performances from the past that I had forgotten. It was so beautiful that I decided to do just a little bit more. And again, it was like magic. Memories from the past performances came to me, and it was all in one image. One sublime image, all those years with all those dances entangled, an image that lasted for a few seconds before it disappeared. I was so taken by the magic of it that I decided to take all the powder. So I put it in a cup of water, I stirred it, and I drank it like a shot. And then something very strange happened to my body. In an instant, it was dancing all the dances that I had danced my whole life. After that, I fell into the floor, and immediately I died. Days later, all the newspapers announced my death, and they said that the cause of my death was overdose of drugs. But in reality, it was overdose of my dance sweat.
Thank you. I hope everybody saw the video all right. It was okay for you?
Yes, perfect.
So it was an excerpt of a performance by Dance On Ensemble by the theater director Rabim Rouet, right? And the name of the performance is Water Between Three Hands. And I would like Madeline to start with a very general question. What triggered actually your interest towards the relation between dance and age?
Yes, Mira, I think the answer a little bit was the video which you just saw, and I selected it for that reason. For us, the Dance On Initiative is about the worth of an individual dancer, and we don't think very strongly that there is no expiry date on the dancers, but we have it very traditionally, specifically when you come from ballet. Also in the mind of the dancer there is this limited time span, 35, 40 years. We made a big questionnaire while traveling through Europe with the project. When do you think a dancer stops dancing, performing on stage? And most of the members of the audience would have in their heads and say 35 to 40 years. And the next question, well, do you think they should stop, or would you like to see them on stage? He said, yes, of course we would like to see them. And the reasons, we asked him why, and they said, well, because of the beauty of their performance, what they have to tell us, the life experience, the excellence of the maturity of their art, and all the good reasons. So that was actually the background. And I mean, it had been done before with the NDT3, which is a famous example. And when we ask people, well, do you know companies with all the dancers? And they also, of course, have in their heads the Pina Bausch company, because when you are already in the company, you could age with the company in her work, but it was exceptional. And so we thought it's time to make, you could say, a cultural political statement, but with an artistic project of excellence, saying, you know, we invite dancers to join who are over 40, so you can't join when you're under 40, and ask choreographers, directors to work with us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I would like to ask Boyan to a little bit broaden up the conversation and elaborate on the notions of time and age, and why and how he came up with the idea of tempus fugit, and why now he thought that it would be relevant for this contemporary moment to delve into these matters.
Well, thank you, Mira. I think it was a both fortunate and misfortunate coincidence. Because fortunate, because on the one hand, I was very much into the reflection around questions of time in a more philosophical perspective, but also in artistic perspective. And by the way, some of the lecture classes that I gave in Berlin, not far from Dan Son's rehearsal studios, in the Ufer studios, were precisely dealing with the question of reversal of time. So I already was kind of into this reflection. But then what happened 2 years ago was precisely the pandemic of COVID-19, which also, I would say, put very much forward the questions of experience of age differences, of the political and social and economic issues which came with this situation. And I have to say, this is for Madeline especially, that in Bulgaria, I would say these problems were quite, I should say, quite dramatic in a way. And not only in the sense of generational shift, but especially I think it was dramatic for artists who were already in the age of retirement or around this age, because it is obvious that there were a lot of means of support of young artists, of networks of support, of Ministry of Culture, etc., which don't cover at all mature artists, so to say. And I think that this was a very clear also question of age difference, when you see those who have a sort of a capacity of, you know, of experience, of accumulated techniques, of also of teaching experience, are somehow removed from the scene. And from that point of view, I think Dance On, as an initiative of Maдлin Ritter and her partners, was, I think, a really kind of targeting, anticipating such a situation. Because I think it's a political project in a way, but also genuinely artistic. because I think we shouldn't sentimentalize age. And this is one of the...
I'm 61.
Comes with melancholy, etc. On the contrary, I think one of the intuitions of dance, only if I understood it well, but I somehow followed from the beginning because of the physical proximity, I think it's the intuition that with maturity, with age, there are other competences, other techniques, other forms of radicality, even because young artists very often speak of radicality. I think radicality of elderly artists sometimes is even kind of much more impressive. These intuitions, I think, were really embodied by this project. So I'm really glad that Madeline is with us here today.
And I think you're totally right. And the pandemic put in, it's like an enlarging glass, how do you say, because we got a lot of interest from the media without performing, because we couldn't perform. We had several premieres like everybody, we were just in hiding in the studios, you could say, trying to work on, but there was a strong interest because we became a symbol. Both the dancers in general were really struck hard by the pandemic, because the body is your own instrument. And if you couldn't, go to the studio with the others, you're really locked out from even the work you do and also all the other work. That was the one thing. And then we had the subject of age and this positive image of dancing on. It's really, we had mainstream media who suddenly were filming us, interviewing us, doing reportage. We even had a cool fashion shooting in one of the big magazines with the beauty of, you don't see much of the body because it's an art photographer. But the idea was that it felt exactly as you said, Boyan. Because of what happened during the pandemic, it became even more evident. And for us, or let's say for me, I'm since many years, I'm really working on the cultural political aspects of funding and how to improve the situation for dance, really on the basics, on the working conditions, on the study, the HCT where you're working, we funded that with the Tanzplan Deutschland to really start supporting structures which really make dance stronger. And somehow we all had a blind spot on the subject of age. Also the independent artists, and most of them are choreographers and dancers. So they think, I always can choreograph for myself. So I always can dance. But when you look closely, exactly what you said with the funding system, they drop out. On the long career development in other fields where you have the senior experts, they get the highest salary because of their experience, and it's, as you said, reversed in dance. And from the art side, there is no reason for that. It's just, I would say, bad habits.
Yeah, one of my questions would be then, do you think that there is a certain pressure exercised by the culture itself, and particularly by the dance structures and dance environment towards dancers beyond certain age just to quit at a certain point of their career? And I would like also to bring the Eastern perspective, which I think Boyan could bring, because he had been working on a project focused on Buto dance, and yes, he was researching Tsutsumi Hijikata's performance and archive. So I would like to ask him also what is the treatment towards the aging body in this culture. And
if I may say something which is also bridge to your archival work, let's say, before we had the Dance On initiative, we had a big initiative to show the value of the history, what's bred in the bone and what is unseen, because we don't have museums for dance. You can't go in and see, this is where it comes from. In any museum, you see, from the beginning of the last century to contemporary art, and you can make connections. So it's like a space of knowledge which you, as an audience, but also the artist. And in dance, it wasn't existing, mainly only through technique, that the techniques were giving on. And with the heritage, also it showed there is a whole generation who are very old, and they became so valuable. Reinhold Hoffmann, older, who were still there to really work with the younger artists to create that link. And then you have something like other cultures who really see, and this is the Japanese culture, for example, who see the body as a container of knowledge, and that you become you could say, a national treasure for your art, because clearly the dance is passed on. So there, in other cultures, there is a different value given to the body as the container of history and knowledge in dance than we have in our European. And I think it comes strongly from the ballet, with the connection to sport, to be very agile and high performance on a delivery level. So I do think there is a strong reason for that. So when you said the systems, yes, it is education. It is also the theaters, the festivals, but also the companies whom they hire, all of them.
I do believe, I absolutely agree. I think there are cultural, economic, political patterns that are somehow functioning by inertia, and they're really pressurizing the field of arts. So the assumption of, let's say, fashion economies or even health economies, that like the body, the model of the fit, healthy body is the young body. I think this is absolutely wrong assumption, even in biological theory, that I'm very much interested in these days. This is wrong, you know. So maybe the most precarious forms of biological existence are the young, bodies, and not the adults. So that from that point of view, we have to have a very different variety, I would say, complex balance of between social groups, between economic also kind of equality in distribution. But this is a broader political issue. But in terms of dance, I think this was really an inertia inherited from the past, that in all other fields of art, take visual arts. I mean, like very often, like
Louise Bourgeois, famous in 70, she was 70.
Exactly. Leonora Carrington, and like there are so many examples, or like of the Maria Lasnik in Austria, like the radical elderly artist. So that's such a figure, and I think we also had some examples of this kind of iconic figures in the field of dance, like Alicia Alonso or Anna Pavlova or Kazuo Ono. But they were kind of exceptions. They were already taken as a sort of monstrosity, in the sense that they're out of the norm. So they're a form of pathology. And as we know, after Georges Canguilhem, pathology and norm are constructed concepts. I mean, we can take as a normative body and normative movement patterns, the patterns of 90 years old Kazuo Ono, or of a differently abled person. And that's why I started creating my own narrative, historical narrative, influenced by my philosophical concept of what I call counter techniques or allo techniques. So, which means different types of techniques, which are precisely not pathological techniques, not techniques that are going astray from the norm, but they're different proposals of technical, artistic organization. And what is technique? I mean, broadly understood, technique is a sort of an extension of a form of existence, which kind of improves this form. And I think in terms of dance techniques, we can find astonishing examples of alternative proposals of techniques coming from elderly dancers, which became a paradigm of being followed. And this is, by the way, the example of Buto. When Buto was invented by Hijikata Tatsumi, there were no elderly dancer. I mean, Hijikata started with Kazuo Ono's son, Yoshihito Ono, and Kazuo Ono was only an ally, but he was not even dancing. And the interesting thing is that they were all young, but they were dancing as if they were this kind of a very...
with this, I remember.
Because this was what was the most interesting. And in fact, I mean, I've been discussing this with my American students online last semester, and I showed them the famous Little Girl of Hijikata's, which is clearly influenced by Mary Wigman's witch dance. And it's obvious that he's an incredible dancer, and that he needs excellent technical skills to perform this, but it looks like this kind of a childish, infantile dance, which is not at all. But so I think we have to change our lenses you know, which are cultural, social lenses, and as Madeline said, the magnifying glass also to make a different focus on certain phenomena.
You're totally right, and I have two anecdotes from my self-experience which very much illustrate what you have been saying. One is with Kazuo Ono himself. I once went to a performance, one of the, I think probably the last one he did in Berlin, and I went there because it was announced specifically with the age that you could see the smell of death because he was so old. And I went there, I went to the first row, and I really wanted, I said, I want to see what death is. Of course, I just saw a man dancing beautifully. But it was this exception that, you know, what all comes with age. And he was, you could say, a beautiful, you know, old dancer. And the other one was in a big performance in Nizza. Merce Cunningham in the Merce Cunningham company, he was sitting on the chair on the stage aside from the company, and at one moment he took his arthrotic body, which is really distorted, and he went on stage and just danced a little part with and marked, because of course it's all bred in the bone. And there was a big discussion afterwards if he should have done this, because people felt intimidated, embarrassed to see such a fragile body among, and I was really angry because I thought it's his choreography. He has any rights to do whatever. But that was actually the first time when there was this confrontation of what we have in our heads, which is so strong. The images, I mean, we know it from science. It's the nocebo and placebo effect. You know, we can hurt ourselves with the image. You could say we hurt the dance culture with the images we have in our heads, which are very strong.
Maybe I can add a personal also anecdote, because I think these are very special about the smell of death. I never heard this, but I think this was very much a discourse which was going around Kazuo Ono, and I think this was completely displaced because it's very much about the affirmation of life.
Yes, exactly.
But I had such an experience with, this was one of Boris Sharmat's projects more than 10 years ago. And I was invited there in my quality of philosopher, but I decided this time I won't teach philosophy to dancers. I will make a dance workshop. But the only dance I could teach was pogo dance, meaning my punk youth in the 80s, right? But I had as an assistant one of the iconic dancers of Merce Cunningham, Wagner Zeiterfeld, who was also part of this workshop. And I can tell you, this was the opening of Spring Festival in Utrecht. All famous curators, MoMA people, everybody sweated there in my workshop. They were completely destroyed, but Wagner at the end was absolutely fit, completely really like a prima ballerina. At the end of the session, I was absolutely exhausted. I took her secretly, but Wagner was untouched, and she was 84.
Yeah,
so
she performed way on. Huh? She performed way on. I saw her also, and it's spectacular. It's spectacular. So yes, there is no. I mean, we could add many examples of very old and maybe one last one. There is with the work of Rabbi Moé in another work which is called "You Should Have Seen Me Dancing Waltz." There is a very highly emotional text about a sniper who looks at a woman and then shoots her. So that's the text, and you hear the text, and there is a 70-year-old dancer of the company, Christine Korno, standing, and she does very simple movement. Very, it's not an expressive dance piece about death, but the way she contains the text in her body, it's exceptional. It's so touching. It's mind-blowing, and because of what she carries and what she can also in a very direct way with the audience. So actually, I do think we lose a lot in relation what dance, because we always say, well, contemporary dance is not so easy on the audience. I think the mature dancer can bring another level of direct link to the audience.
From that point of view, sorry, Mira, I just wanted to this introductory scene that you chose, Madeline, I think was extremely important because it challenges the perspective of a body as a performing body only, because this, I think, is excellent idea for rabbis about the sweating body, which produce by its own excess, by its own labor effort. It produces another body, which is kind of a quintessential body, but it is also an archive of the body.
Yes.
And precisely the mature artist has this kind of, her or his body is becoming an embodied archive and of techniques, but of experience, which I think it was an excellent metaphor of Rabbi Merouai, who is, of course, a good friend of ours.
I will try to just play an excerpt of the performance that Madeline just spoke about. You should have seen me.
She is in her 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And has a heavy body, full and limp. The woman jumps from one point to the other, not caring about her body's heaviness and its wrinkle. Flabby body, soft and flaccid, runs and jumps. It looks as if she is dancing waltz in a very strange and exciting way.
Well, you're amazing, Mira. You just right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Christine Kono, there, and she also has that because she worked with so many also as a teacher, because also when you know it, right? If you don't know it, teach it. So once you really came, I mean, Boyan, you know it, you really come to know what you teach. So that also actually enriches. It's not you stop. So ideally, if someone teaches, he's still also dancing, because normally it says, well, at a certain age, then you become a teacher because you no longer are fit to perform. So both, if it goes together, it enriches both the teaching and, of course, the performing as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And since modernity, the beauty in dance is no longer associated with perfection or virtuosity or technique. So it's about presence, individuality, archive, past, knowledge, so many things that constitutes the notion of beauty, I would say.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think Dance On is about that as well. And I'm curious also to discuss the points of social political agency of contemporary dance, and is it a good platform to articulate critical reflection towards these obsessions of contemporaneity that we just discussed? The idealization of youth and this operational, functional manner of producing all the time, success, speed, exhilaration, and age being seen as a deficit, because something that is weak, that does not produce, could not be captured in the capitalistic regime of performativity that produces some goods, let's say.
I mean, you triggered all the points, Mira, in one. It's all there.
It's all
so
there.
It would be a whole semester to talk about.
Boyan has a book on this as well.
I think this is why it is so important. For example, we have a new work, we call it Making Dances, Dancing Replies. And we took iconic works from Lucinda Childs, from her very early work when she started doing silent works, Merce Cunningham, a very early one, experimental one with free. And we also have a Martha Graham, because one of the dancers is a longtime soloist. And we then asked contemporary artists, some younger, some mature, Tim Atchells, Mathilde Monnier, and Enrico Ticcione and Ginevra Panzetti, to create answers. And what is very interesting, both for the artists. So you have these very radical works, and they stay radical. That's the amazing part. There is something, because one always says such an ephemeral art form, but it stays. The work has a substance which really transcends time. That's my first conviction. But also, people need to dance it. that's the ultimate experience, that you dance it yourself as a dancer, but of course for an audience also to see this work. And then when it's related to contemporary work, it also opens different viewpoints on the contemporary work, because we never are out of time. We can't be. Though we exist only in the moment, but it's all bred in the bone. I mean, you know, with all the mother's generations. And I think in the country where you come from, there is also another part in society which has this strong link. And somehow in dance, it's not so evident. But when it's opened, it's like a treasure box.
Mm. And I would try to show a part of an excerpt of Lucinda Child's performance.
And maybe I say something before?
Sure.
So
share.
So what is interesting to know, and then we since 2019, one of the first dancers of the dance ensemble, which as you said was funded in 2050, Taibu Mashain then became the artistic director, and he's a long-time dancer and also stager of Lucinda's work, and also it started from a conversation where she actually disregarded her early works. They were laying around. There were one or two which had been done in a certain time, and then because she wants to do new work, that's normal. As an artist, you don't really want to dig in, you know, in the closets, what's hanging around there. You like to just work and be creative. But then she was open to it, and it became a beautiful conversation about which work to pick. And when she first performed this work in Paris, when she was asked, because there was a strong interest, when was that? It was in the 70s, 80s. The audience booed. And they said, "Where's the music? There must be they called the technicians, turn on the music, do your work." And the music is actually the sound of the body. And so we see an excerpt of these early works, which I talked before, as the silent works.
Just give me a minute.
It had always been a dream of mine to stage these early works from Lucinda Child. There's nothing to hide behind. There's no extraneous movements, costumes, or lighting, or even characterizations or virtuosity to kind of disappear behind. It's really stripped down, and it really shows the people. It's perfect for a group of dancers who have so much to share. Just by being there. They have such histories and they have such stories written on their bodies that just the simplicity of them being in the room is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I wanted to ask you how, because you're working with a variety of directors and choreographers, how do you select them, and who decides that? Do you do work on topics? Do you are you interested in different formats, or how does it work?
All of it, Mira.
All of it.
You always ask the perfect question. It's all the
yes or no.
I mean, there is in the very beginning, for the first edition, we really looked together. Christopher Roman was the first director, together with him, you know, who would be interesting for mature dancers. And we started asking people like Rabbi Moe and who had never made a dance piece, but I saw him performing with Boris Shamatz in a situation, and asked him, just like that, would you like to make a dance piece with older dancers? And he just, of course, I always wanted to make a dance. So sometimes it was very simple. It came from situations when there was either from me or then from Christopher. He really had a relation with Deborah Hay, and of course with Foresight, we had for a time a Foresight piece in there. So it came from the own lineage. Also this, as I said, with Lucinda, before, really from the Thai Bumashan, who is now the artistic director, of working with her. But then also he always says, well, we want to have, as a mature dancer, you don't want to be bored. You really want to be work with something which catches your curiosity. And it can be something so difficult as these physical verbs like Lucinda. First, when you look at it, it looks simple, but it's all the dancers said it's the hardest thing they ever danced in their life. And they really conquered the work. It is that. Or with Rabbi Moe, who really works on the subject of the politics of the body, but also very much death and what is left. And that, of course, speaks also to mature dancers with when you have the body which is fragile and all the techniques you develop to keep it, let's say. And they love working with him because he is a partner, both, you could say, for the heart and for the art. So the last, for a future piece, we asked Christoph Papadopoulos for a big group piece where all the 12 dancers we work with. And there it was, Tai said, we really want to work on the musicality of dance and really on the scripture of dance. Is that the right word? Not technique, but something who really uses the composition of dance, not something else, which is in the heart of the art form. So, and he has that quality. So it comes from conversation of what is, what have we done already, and also what really is in the core of the art form which we want to develop, and what's interesting for the dancers. Yes.
And I also, while looking through their repertoire, I also came upon this performance, which actually I wanted to invite some time ago, Ivana Müller's performance with Dance on Ensemble. It also has another perspective of dealing with these notions of time and age, the threats, this performance.
Yeah, it's very much, it was, before we always said this is a carte blanche. Just because the dancers are older, whatever you do, it does not need to be the subject of age and everything around it, or the stories of the dancers, what they did in their lives. Do whatever you are interested in the moment in your art form, and do it together with the dancers. And this is our proposition. But then we said, well, maybe it's time to really do a piece which is about aging, time, what's left, and how you deal with that, both as a human being, but then also what it means for having it on the performance space. And so when we talked to Ivana, it was about that. So the original title, the working title, was Aging. Now it became Threads, because they have the threads as a symbol of unfolding and wrapping up and letting it go. So she became the first, because she works so much from the concept of also language, and also because it was a piece together with the actors from the Münchner Kammerspiele. So it was clear we wanted to work both with actors and with dancers. So this is how we came into a conversation with Ivana Müller.
You know that?
What?
In this moment, I have an image in my mind.
Feden is a piece that could be actually seen as a series of meditations on different concepts of time.
For the first time in my life, I truly understood.
It's a collaboration between performers that are dancers of Dance on Ensemble in Berlin and actors from Kammerspiele in Munich.
Category, daily item.
We are actually thinking about different concepts of time from the point of view of now. And this now can be seen as a suspended moment in time, in our personal times, in the kind of historical time also. We can reflect about what was past and maybe trying to imagine what is the future. At first, the main idea of this work was to reflect about the process of aging as a process of time passing, something that is inherent in everybody's, let's say, living contract. And it was interesting also to look at it from different points of view of people participating in the project, as they have different age, they have different experiences, both as humans and as performers. The specific quality of this piece also comes from a relation with a material that we are using, yarns like this, that are accompanying the process of thinking, but they're also defining, let's say, the gestures, the movements, the necessities to move. And actually, through raveling and unraveling the yarns, we are also raveling and unraveling stories about time, about our specific or collective relationship to time.
I'm done.
Okay.
Already?
How long was it?
93 seconds.
Wow, it felt like a lifetime. Yeah.
As in most of my works, we have used the text almost as a choreographic material. That means that we were treating it in a more poetic way, thinking more of it as being a music that has a certain intensity, color, etc. The textuality of the piece is not aiming to tell a story. The text is very closely embodied with physical actions or physical conditions. So it's actually the text, the movements, and also the presence of the material that are then in a dialogue and creating a language of the piece.
Now? Yes. Why not?
But going back to that moment,
Which moment?
well, the moment you realize that you always be older and never younger.
That moment is probably quite liberating.
Sorry, what were we talking about?
I don't know. I forgot. I forget all the time.
So I'd like to ask you about the mission that you've mentioned, that you have a mission also to inspire such similar projects in other communities, other places. What kind of ensembles or such projects have you done already, or have you initiated through traveling to places and working with people?
My partner always says your path is plastered with failed missions and visions, but you always have a good plan. So the plan we had to actually enlarge, because in the beginning it was just 6 dancers, and how can 6 dancers change something, you could say. And they can perform, there are so many performances, we're a small organization. And we really thought, and then this when we created a European network, which is called, and we actually got funding from the Creative Europe, it's called Dance On, which is what we talk about, Pass On, what we also talked about, really what's passed on as knowledge in this ephemeral art form. And then Dream On, that also for everybody, there is no reason to stop dancing. Clearly, one of the dancers said, I imagine I dance till my last breath. But also for ordinary people. And so this is really a growing network, and we do collaborations with artists. And something we call Dance On Extended is actually where we give our dancers to other projects. We say, well, we are working with these beautiful dancers. If you want to make a piece with them, we find money to pay our dancers. So it's a practical production support. And also it can be a mix, like with Jan Martens we did. The youngest, it doesn't need to be an old cast. The youngest dancer in Any Attempt Will End in Crushed Bodies and Broken Bones, right? That's the title. The youngest one is 16 and the oldest 68. And it's 3 of our dancers and we are collaborating. And so it's both, you could say, sustainability, what we think of making use of our production means making use in a good way of the beauty and quality of the dancers, but also connecting us with others, not just our own production. So we try out ways to really extend. And so we are open for anybody who wants to get in contact with us.
One last question. Boyan, will you tell us more about this Hijikata project, please? Because it's a huge one and it's in process, ongoing. So will you enlighten us a little bit?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I'll try to connect the Hijikata project to what Madeline just described, because I think I really very much believe in this word substance. And, you know, in philosophy, it's kind of outdated and it says, oh, this is substantialist, metaphysical, etc., etc. But I think we need to rethink what substance is, because if we live in this kind of contemporary idea of, you know, of the ultimate contemporaneity, there is nothing left, you know, everything is left over. You know, there is no archive, there is no memory. And I think we need to rethink the substance precisely through perhaps the concept of threat, because substance is something that is being, you know, weaved ongoingly or reweaved. So it's something that is in a constant transformation, but it still has presence, you know, and that's how there is some synthesis of temporality possible. And I think that Danson is, because I followed their work, especially very closely in the beginning, and I can say that there was this double attempt on one hand to not simply reenact, but really to I would say to revitalize something that is put somehow, you know, under the carpets of history, but it has substance. So it needs certain mechanisms, certain frame to just reemerge, because it is there under, you know, it's a little bit botanical metaphor, but it is there in the soil and it can reemerge. So it is a reemergence of something that was there a long time ago, but of course it doesn't reemerge in the same way. So I think this is quite beautiful and also politically, but also artistically important. So, and I think this is what is genuine substance in this project, that it's not only about political surplus value, but it is about genuine artistic value, and that the artistic value is a political value. I think that's something that is very important. And then you also produce new work. You know, I think this is very important as well, that there is a new projects emerging out of this situation. I think this is really a political task. And as to our work on Hijikata, this is part of my, of course, work with the Meteor Collective. So it was initiated by Meteor, meaning Ani Vaseva, Leonid Yovchev, and myself, but also my Japanese friends, the philosophers Yasuo Kobayashi and Futoshi Hoshino. By the way, Kobayashi was witnessing the late Hijikata's work, and he has quite a connection to this scene. And our interest, of course, was first of all triggered by artistic interest, but also it was triggered by, I would say, historical and philosophical interest, because historical interest is great. Because, for instance, Hijikata and also Katsuo Ono are a very, I would say, powerful example on how artistic or art historic narratives are created, or how stereotypes are established. And when we started studying, especially with the mediation of our Japanese partners, when we visited the Hijikata archive, when we worked with Japanese artists, we realized that somehow the very narrative of history is already transformation of history. And somehow how the genuine substance sometimes is displayed because of the needs of the market, because of the needs of the certain situations. And of course, it is always like that in history. So we don't try to disclose the original substance of Hijikata's work, but we see a potential that is somehow not unpacked, that there is a potential which is absolutely, how should I say, young, in the sense that it is very fresh. And it is, for instance, what we discovered, that Hijikata Tsumi already in the late 50s, late 90s, 59, for instance, he is writing on the political substance of performance art, which is a discourse that in Europe and in American studies arrived much later. So there is so interesting development in that. And in fact, of course, our attempt is to recreate this work by other means. So this interest in artistic, what our common friend Helmut Stöbst was calling transmedial connection. This was something, it was of big interest in the field of dance. So, for instance, we try to identify the literary sources of Buto, which are very much connected to French literature. Artaud, Bataille, L'Autre Amant, Marquis de Sade. So it's, of course, Jean Genet. The first nickname of Hijikata was Hijikata Genet. So it's a very interesting thing. So basically, this was initially a technique of, so to say, translating literary techniques, narrative techniques, rhetorics, poetry into bodily techniques. So that's quite interesting. And then afterwards, Hijikata started working with visual language. So basically, he was making sort of cut-ups out of magazines, of catalogs. For instance, reproductions of Schiele, or Renoir. Who would imagine that behind Buto you would have a visual script of Schiele and Renoir? And then it opens a completely different perspective on Buto, but also on the idea of cultural transmission and interference, and also mediation, transfer. And then in philosophical terms, it is extremely interesting how this kind of a precarity of media, precarity of narratives create a very powerful potential of producing new work. And basically the outcomes now of our Hijikata projects are, a choir based on written poetic texts that I co-author with Hijikata Tatsumi, because we started translating his own texts that are unknown. To my knowledge, there was only one TDR magazine which translated 2 texts, which are, our Japanese colleagues show that they are not perfectly translated by a Japanese scholar. Then Chamatz, together with Jean Balibar, they also, I think they're the only contemporary dancers who worked with Hijikata's text from his famous diaries. And they are known in Europe. So this is our critical work on his text, but which we try to recreate in a poetic theatrical work at that moment through Leonid Yovchev, the prominent Bulgarian actor whom we work with, solo, and Ani Vasova is the director, like the leading figure of Meteor. And myself, I work on this kind of a poem, I call it dark poem, to answer Ankoko Buto, the dark dance proposal, which is very much trying to trigger the political implications of Buto that are completely unknown. This idea of transformation of the body that is connected to certain political utopia in Hijikata's text, very strange, very problematic in a way as well. And the interesting outcome is my fantastic proposal, is that the Mishima Yukio's failed coup d'etat, this conservative coup that he tried to trigger, and as a result he commits seppuku, was perhaps influenced by his fellow Hijikata's famous project Hijikata Tatsumi and the Japanese people, which was in a way an attempt to, in the year of 68, to talk to Japanese people and to trigger some sort of a social transformation by artistic means. And from that point of view, this is of course the reflection on this perhaps lost utopia on the radical power of art, the political utopia of 50 years ago. But at the same time, we try to stimulate, to mobilize the possibility of a new, I would say, critical utopia. We don't believe in this kind of radical revolution that will transform the world, but I think that we need this kind of a critical utopias that allow us to rethink our legacy, our physical archives, our cultural archives, and to produce perhaps a better synthesis of times in future. So that future is possible. And this course of future is very important in Buto as well.
I mean, but listening to you being so passionate about it, I think this demonstrates very much how alive, the whole subject of heritage and history in dances, and also how interconnected it is with everything in society, because we always think, dance is, there and the rest is there. Always dance has always the problem as being experienced as outside of society there, for the joy in the general way, but also also not so serious as an art form. But what you say is it has all the levels on the philosophical level and also political level. And also what you describe, what you want to do is, because I'm in the board of the Pina Bausch Foundation, and the task is how to access and what does it mean to have a living archive, but with the resources of the physical archive, let's say the texts, and with Pina, of course, it's all the videos because they're all there. And actually there is a strong connection also with your archive. It was always talked that somehow we need to work with your archive, and because it has such an exceptional value. When you look around dance from individual artists, there is not so much really as a substance of archive. And then the question really is, and this is what we tried with the heritage and what you just described, is really how to touch it, what to do with it, and also not be afraid. The substance can't be heard. It's like the culture political level is both, neither the body nor the heritage in dance. It's not a disposable art form. And it's so much like creating something new permanently and the rest doesn't count. That means it's disposable. It doesn't mean anything. You have no ground. The feet are not on the ground. They're some are lost in space, you could say. And initiatives like what you described, what you are doing, or what the Pina Bausch Foundation is doing, or also when you really restage what Shamatz has been doing. He is so obsessed with it in a beautiful way. It's amazing. His love. I mean, I was on the big old field, the big airport, Tempelhof. And everybody was dancing wingman and stuff, and he was demonstrating how to do it in Berlin. And everybody had fun. It was really hot. And we are somehow, and that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And there, we don't really have, I mean, in all the other art form, there is you could say, a science of the archive. And for dance, we really need to develop it and find our own ways. And whatever you are doing on both of the level of teaching and working with the archive, of doing artistic project with that, it's exactly, I'm very passionate about it. It's the work which needs, and also, Mira, when I went to Chile some years ago, when we talked to artists there, they said, what is with our own archive? I mean, we have a history from the last 20, 30 years, and it's not there, basically, and we will not be seen in the future. And there's a strong desire on artists who are in their 40s, and also from the partners we have from Slovenia and Serbia, but also in the other countries. There's a strong desire of this archive to be interconnected, and because it's felt that it's really enriching the contemporary work, but also it's really necessary as a communication with the general, beyond the audience, with the society.
Yes, absolutely. Me myself, I'm also involved in such a project with partners from the Balkans and Western Balkans. Yes, to do this archiving work here, which is no longer. Yeah, but why do you think it became so important, so pressing issues? All these archiving and all these revisiting of the history of iconic figures and performances. I think it's a very strong trend for the last, let's say, 10 years. Do you think there is some other explanation?
I mean, I have a general theory about how the universe and everything works, and it's part of that. Basically, at a certain time, there are necessities and energies, and it's all over the place. It's not just in Europe or so. That was what I felt, for example, with the Tanzplan, when we were starting with joining forces, we discovered, and we didn't know it, at the same time in Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Switzerland, people were thinking in the same way. And you know it from the science. There is a certain time when you could say an invention is due. Also political disruption, also the same. It's and it's the same on. That's what I mean as my theory about the universe and the rest, like Douglas Adams. 42 is the answer. What was it? What is the question? That is one. It doesn't explain the specific subject, and I think on the specific subject, it was really. I think it's connected what is my worth? Strong, also with the everything is there. Also with the internet, everything seems to accessible. It seems that all the knowledge is there, but you don't feel it. You can't really touch it. It's there and it's not there. And so that is something I think it is not just in dance. I think the dance is an expression of a desire in the society to base, you could say, to find some ground under your feet. And it's very much needed. We don't have it much. I mean, if you look in your own family, once the grandparents are dead, and then you suddenly discover questions you wanted to ask them, and there is nobody to ask. And I remember the brother of my father really worked on the history of our family, and the kids, we all were not interested. And then there was the moment when my father was also getting very old, and he felt like we have no interest in the history. He has to safeguard the audience, the archive. So he decided to give it to an official archive and not leave it in the shelves of our family house. But when they came, and he was already ill, he couldn't let it go. He was holding the books in his hand and not trying to let it go, because there's something physical about it. And at least I see my little brother, he's a keeper of our family archive, and maybe at one point the daughters, nieces will be, but it's fragile. It's a fragile system. And I think it's interconnected with the general desire of, because of the globalization and everything, there is this also from, this is a long sentence, but let's say when we had the financial crisis in Greece, and everybody was talking about, from the German side, about the Greek people, that they are living on our money, and the whole culture, everything was degraded. They were just looked at in this one way of, they are eating up our money, right? Because they had this big financial program. And at that point, I took part in a workshop there on the body and money. And it was in the physics of everybody as a suffering to be degraded like that. Or we have it in the history of the GDR. Suddenly you are degraded. And what worth? What worth is an individual life, but with an individual, it's always in the lineage. And you can make many lineages in your family, in your art form, on the political level. When you interconnect, I'm pointing, you don't know where I'm pointing to Boyan right now, on the philosophies, of the decades, and which are vital. So I think, and also personally, when I was young, I had no interest. It comes with age, on a personal development. I think there is more, once you're more middle age, you suddenly see the whole image of also that your life is final eventually. So you start looking at what it is made of. Would you agree on that, Boyan? It was a long one.
No, I absolutely agree. But I was very touched by your example with the family archive, because I think that is where this questioning starts from. Because to be very honest, I have ongoingly these discussions with my sister or mother, because we have the archives of two families from at least 19th century old library. So how to deal physically, even or with my father's, who was a linguist, legacy, a lot of manuscripts. And then you start asking questions. We are living in a society which produces enormous amount of archives, but very often these archives are affective archives, as my former partner Julia Palladini would put it, affective archive, right?
What does it mean?
Affective archive. Yeah. She wrote this book, right? Yeah. And I think that's a very big question, because in dance, you have this issue also, not only in dance, the life arts. I mean, to put it in a more kind of anecdotic level, I think to some extent, young people are irresponsible to their own archives because they think life is eternal.
Exactly.
Right? And young artists, radical artists from the 60s zone, or maybe from the 20s zone of last century, produced this enormous amount of work that was not archived, and then there is a need of some sort of a maturity to be responsible towards this legacy. And that's how I think these questions came at stake. Unfortunately, I think academia was quite late. So in general. I mean, and I think projects like Tanzplan or Dance On were really important in influencing trends in both academia and also kind of in the public sphere, because I think now that's a trend, perhaps not sufficiently institutionally framed. For instance, in Bulgaria, I think is a disastrous situation where archives, even of the most prominent figures of like actors or who pass away, they are kind of a living history. What happens to the archives? I don't know. Are they donated to state archive or to theaters are responsible for them? I know stories about philosophers, even not only Bulgarian also. So these are, but this is a huge, I think, also political and cultural question. But this activity, I think, is absolutely worth, because without archive, without memory, without past, we are doomed, right? Because this is our affects, which are kind of sedimented in bodies. I mean, they are not kind of this kind of dead documents. They're alive, you know. So they can be used.
And we made an experience with the Pina Bausch archive. There's one, Riccardo Viviani, who is working on the oral history with the dancers. And to go beyond the anecdote when they're telling, because, you know, you have the first layer is the stories you told many times, like in a family, you know, you have the 10 most told stories when you have gatherings. It's like that. It's the same in a dance company like Pina Bausch. But then you go deeper, then he would really work with the physical archive, like with what is written, the images, the video, and then you open another layer of memory of going deeper. So you need, it's the interesting part. It's the, you know, what you remember as a physical being in your body, because sometimes it's really in the movement. You know, you could trigger it. We've seen there's a beautiful video of a woman with Parkinson, and then she starts moving, and it's all there. It's fantastic. But then, of course, what you remember, and maybe falsely remember, I mean, you have a whole lecture probably about false memories, but all unfolds, and it needs that. And then Salomon Bausch, the son, always says, it needs to be danced. I mean, this is what the Cunningham Foundation does. They have these capsules, and they are really teaching the younger generation of stagers, because eventually everybody who worked with him will be dead. So the most closest knowledge is no longer there. So you need to transmit it in that way as a physical, and of course, the concrete, you know, what we have now, the digital archive, right? And we have, I mean, on the political level, the French are always better with that, I have to say. They invested 40 million euros so many years ago, where they digitalized everything which is on radio, public radio and television. And there is a lot of dance in there. In Germany, it's not done because there's all the regionals, and they destroy the tapes. They need space. It was a lot. I mean, with Cage, we have an amazing Cage archive with from Cologne, the radio station there. It wasn't really seen as a treasure and a resource also for use and how to make use of it. And that really needs, because we keep the buildings. There's always money in each society. There is a lot of money for keeping the buildings, which is seen as our national treasure. But all the ones which is not so easy, like what is talked, danced, performed, that is the same value. That needs culture political work. And we are not there yet. It's really, and this is when we applied for the Europa Nostra with the Dance Fund's Heritage Program. We were the very first applying for dance, and they discussed if we could apply at all. And we were like the exotic ones. And then they said, well, it's heritage, it's dance, and why not? And then they let us, and we won a prize. And this opened up a little bit, that actually dance is part of the European heritage as well. But if you look at the Europeana, you know, which is an effort by the European Union to create this European digital, for dance, you don't need to go there. There isn't much there. But it needs the translators, as you say. Yeah, it needs always it needs to be used, transmitted, spoke about, just like that. The object is not what let's say the source is, the original, or what you call how would you call it?
The matrix.
What is the substance actually?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting hour for me. And we've been following very long and intricate threads for an hour and 15 minutes. So thank you. It was a pleasure for me to have you as my guest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madeline.
And Boyan, next time when you are in Berlin, please, Mira as well.
Thank you.
Stopped me from, but I must come back because I think I left a cheese in my fridge because I thought in 2 weeks I'll be back. I left in March. Could you I'm joking. but we're almost neighbors because I know from your office from Ingo is on Kredestrasse, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm on Monumentenstrasse.
There you go. So let's
yes,
do that.
Absolutely.
Definitely, and thank you very much. And I also think the title Tempus Fugit is very nice. And I think if you stick with it, it needs a long breath to really, as a means of connecting with people and unfolding that isn't done with one, let's say, project, and it has a very strong resonance. It's my experience of being in for 10 years now around this subject. It's just starting, you could say. Yeah. So,
we are just starting, but let's hope now we will make some progress by the end of the year. Thank you very much, Madeline. I hope to extend this conversation on another occasion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mira.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.